This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
What's up, guys? Home stretch here on Inside the Paint. Ira Winderman in his jail-looking hotel room in Milwaukee.
They just slid breakfast under the door, so I'm very happy. You know what? Sometimes, the sausage biscuit can be enough. So thank you, Warden.
Oh, I thought it was going to be bread and water, going to old school Shawshank Redemption. All right, so we talked about the Brooklyn game and the Milwaukee game because those are the first two. Philadelphia is so intriguing to me, and it's because, look, I kind of felt like you'd have this honeymoon period, which we've already seen because we saw it in Brooklyn with James Harden. And I feel like this is kind of James Harden's MO, is like things were all roses and sunshine early on. And he's somebody who is so talented that he can go in somewhere and do what he did last year in Brooklyn and what I think he's going to do, at least for the early stretch here in Philadelphia, which is kind of play more of a point guard role. And he's somebody who he's so good with the ball in his hands, and he's such a good passer and really smart. The thing that I find interesting with Harden, and Zach Lowe did a deep dive on this a couple of weeks ago, he's somebody who is terrible down the stretch of games. I mean, when you talk about, we've talked about Jimmy Butler struggling with making shots down the stretch. Harden is downright awful. And so when you get to these moments of truth where your playoff games are going to be decided largely by one possession, it's going to be Joel Embiid. If you're Philadelphia, if you're Doc Rivers and you're trying to draw up a play late in games, based on James Harden's track record, you got to throw everything at Joel Embiid. And if James Harden finds a way to beat you, then you tip your cap. But I feel like this is one of these things, Ira, and see if you're with me on this. There's going to be this honeymoon period, and Philadelphia may come down here and win this game against Miami. I'm less bullish on them come playoff time when those moments of truth hit and you have to figure out who's going to get the ball. And if it is Harden, his track record says it ain't going to be very good.
No, and that's the thing. We've never seen this before. Harden in Oklahoma City with Steven Adams. Harden when he had a center in Houston with Clint Capella, was a role guy, was not a dynamic scorer. Certainly the Nets didn't have anything close to a center when he went there. But just like we've spoken all along here about these final 6 weeks of the season, then the exhale and the inhale to get ready for the playoffs, that's when you game plan. So right now, no one is game planning. You can't game plan saying dominant scorer like Harden, dominant big man like Embiid, because you're going game to game, and that's the only time you're going to face. That's the only time that he faces this week. Let's look at the center combinations right now. God bless Vucevic for what he is in DeRozan, but it's not Harden and Embiid. It's not that physical style. That's not the same. Tonight in Milwaukee, they play Giannis as the primary big man. There's no dynamic as much as Middleton could be that there's not that. Tomorrow, certainly in Brooklyn, there's not that. So in the regular season, you play into the other team's hands to a degree just because you don't game plan. Playoffs are different. The problem with having a center as your go-to guy, and this has been the problem over the years, even when the Lakers were debating Kobe and Shaq, you have to get the ball in your center's hands. You can't, he doesn't start the possession. He's not advancing the ball and deciding what to do. So if you can cut that off, the entry pass into the center, if you can have him catching the ball farther out than he wants, you can mitigate that a little. There are very few teams. I don't know if there's really been any team over the years that has had its center as its go-to scorer. Even Kareem, with the unstoppable sky hook, you had to get him the ball on the block for him then to go to work. Magic was great at that. So of course it worked then. They had a Hall of Fame, maybe the all-time best point guard. So I am curious if Philadelphia has to cast Joel Embiid as go-to guy, can they actually get a playbook and a way of doing that? You know the Heat are going to wall him off. You know they're going to front him. You know they're going to make it hard. And you certainly don't want that pass tipped away and the play to end right there. So Clay, I think it's interesting. As much as Joel Embiid might arguably and probably still is their best player, certainly an MVP candidate, starting with the center, unless he's a Jokic kind of player operating off the elbow, I think is a little bit difficult. I am curious, and let's face it, if you talk to me about James Harden struggling in the playoffs, Doc Rivers, except for that one championship in Boston, hardly has a great playoff resume also. Hell, his team can get up 3-0 and you still don't know what's going to happen.
JP says that hotel room does look like a hospital room or a prison cell. He's right. Yeah, and look, I still think that was a great trade for Houston or for Philadelphia.
Right.
Thinking Daryl Morey again for Philadelphia because you traded away a player who wasn't going to play for you. So you bring in Harden, and like you're upgrading just because you're bringing in a really, really good player who is actually going to be on the floor. And I'm not surprised at all that it's working early, and they look really good right now. But I also think that, man, we talked about the importance of role players early. They're going to miss Seth Curry. Like
Yes.
I think
I was absolutely thinking about him just when you said that. Yeah, I watched him last night play for the Nets, and you could see how he could be a late game scorer. He had a great driving layup there toward the end of that game to keep him in there. A playoff proven shooter and scorer at the end for that kick out when you do double. So I agree. They gave up something tangible in that trade. Not Drummond, probably not Simmons because we don't know what he is. But I do think they'll miss Seth Curry. That was a huge trade they made a year ago when they traded Josh Richardson for Seth Curry. Yes. And even I was questioning, I'm going, but Josh is a complete player. He's a defender. And Seth Curry is by far emerged as the superior player. Josh has been moved on since then, twice. So you could see the difference. So, yeah, I mean, yes, I like Maxey. I like Tybal. I think they're nice emerging young players. Are they Game 7 players? That's what we'll see.
Yeah, and with Maxey, I'm a huge fan, but he's also a guy who has to have the ball in his hands to be extremely effective. And if you're adding a James Harden, that's where, we talk about the Russell Westbrook thing and not working in LA. When you add another ball-dominant player, it can stymie the growth of a young player who needs the ball in his hands to get there. And so, yeah, I really like some of the pieces on Philadelphia. It's just come playoff time, do you trust them to all come together? And the other thing, when we were talking about the Heat being able to roll out these defenders against a Brooklyn and even potentially a Boston, who has given Miami trouble in the past, but you're assuming you get Victor Oladipo back, you got a lot of defenders you can roll out at Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Same thing applies if you're going against Philadelphia. You don't feel bad if you have to switch an Oladipo onto a Harden. If you have to switch, if you're playing Jimmy Butler, Victor Oladipo, Kyle Lowry, Bam Adebayo, PJ Tucker, I mean, that's a lineup where there's nobody who scares you as far as a matchup goes. I mean, Kevin Durant's a phenomenal player. He has the matchup advantage over literally anybody. However, the Heat are built better to match up with teams like that. So if you play a Philadelphia in the playoffs, you're not as concerned down the stretch. But to your point, we're talking about a potential playoff series. I'm not talking about Saturday night. Saturday night, I could easily see this honeymoon period extending, especially if Kyle Lowry is still out, in Philadelphia coming down here and winning this game, despite the fact that it's a big game for Miami as well.
Yeah, and again, the one thing is we're lining up teams that are tough matchups for the Heat. I might even have Boston among the top right there in the playoffs. But if you're talking about singular players, I fear Joel Embiid more than Kevin Durant for this reason. Like you mentioned, I have options against Kevin Durant. I can put PJ Tucker on him. I can put Jimmy Butler on him. I have different ways to go. Of course, you're going to trap and double team and all of that. I think Saturday is a big game. You were mentioning whether Bam should be player of the month for February, and if you lined up his statistics against Joel Embiid is significantly higher. He had an unbelievable month. I think he's going to get that award, but I think Bam needs to show he could stand up to Joel Embiid. That's why Saturday is important, because he sort of, there's two matchups remaining. There's also a Monday about 2 weeks down the road, one of the Heat's few road games left. If Bam can make a statement, at least put something in the Sixers' heads and Joel Embiid's heads, I feel a little bit better. I think he is, of the Eastern Conference, if we're doing one of those internet lists, toughest individual matchups in the Eastern Conference, I would have number one. He's so unique. He shoots the jumper.
Oh, he's so
and
good.
Again, he makes Bam look small. When you watch them jump the opening tip,
yes,
I mean, you can see like, wow, Bam looks like a shooting guard. So that's a difference. So I do think maybe Saturday's game, I'd put it this way, might be more important for Bam Adebayo individually than it is for the Heat as a team.
That's interesting, and I like that take a lot. And I did think it was interesting. We talked about this in the first segment of the show, how the Heat handled the matchup against the Bulls the other night, where you had Jimmy Butler on Vucevic a bit. Vucevic is different in that you're more concerned about him going outside and less concerned about him inside than you are with Joel, even though Vucevic can do both very well. And Embiid can do both well to a certain extent, but like you're happy if Embiid is willing to take that three-pointer because of how good he is on the inside and how big and how strong he is. So I feel like part of the reason why the Heat did that was because, number one, Vooch goes outside, but also with Vooch, he can back you down if you don't have a low center of gravity. And as great as Bam is, and man, he's so good at switching against these wing guys. And I love the videos of him switching out and guarding Kyrie Irving and guarding Steph Curry. It's been the bigger players who can. Bam's center of gravity isn't as low as like a Jimmy Butler's is.
Or
So
PJ Tucker,
Joel
right?
Embiid, it's one of those rare situations where it's not that Embiid is like so much better than Bam. It's that the matchup is tough because he can do some things that are tough for Bam to handle. So I think that's a really good point, and I want to see how that plays out. So I know we're not really in the prediction game, Ira, but if you can kind of give me a general feel on how you see these next three games playing out for the Heat. You already mentioned that tonight you're looking at a Bucks team that's going to be desperate. How do you see these next three games playing out relative from the Miami perspective, how they're going to view these games and potentially how they may shake out?
I would say tonight advantage Milwaukee. I'd say Thursday absolute unknown because of Kevin Durant. And I got a feeling, and especially now with Steve Nash and COVID protocols, we won't know until game time there. So sort of a toss-up. If KD doesn't play, there is no excuse for Miami Heat not to go into Brooklyn, even on the second night of a back-to-back, and get that W with no KD, no Simmons, no Kyrie. We have to know on that. And I'd say sort of Friday is a little bit of a push, is a little bit right in the middle there. It's not a back-to-back for the Heat, but they will be coming off the road. They'll get a chance to exhale a little bit. I would be content with one of the next three. I would be very impressed with two of the next three. That's the way I would put it. Then you get a little bit of an exhale. You get the Houstons. Yes, I know Phoenix is coming, but Chris Paul is out. I know Cleveland is coming, but they're sort of becoming a little more like Cleveland right now also. So don't fret about, oh, you're 20 over 500 and you might not be by the end of the week. There'll be a chance to build back up. Of the importance of this week's games, I would rate tonight as the most important because I do think that tiebreaker could come into play with the Bucks, and this is the last game of the season series. The difference is with Philly, even though you've split the first two, you'll have that game Saturday and another one in Philly later down the road. You can play with that tiebreaker. So in terms of importance, I would put tonight number one, Philadelphia number two, and play in Brooklyn probably number three.
It's boring when we agree, so I'll disagree a little bit on this one, but it's actually because of a point you made. I'm going to say Saturday nights is the most important, and it's for the point you made about Bam versus Embiid. The Heat need to be able to show that they have a plan that they can feel confident in come play. Now, with that said, I think the point you've made over and over again, which is true, is you can't really look at regular season games and say, oh, this is the game plan that they're going to have, because they're going to come up with something completely different. But one-on-one individual matchups don't change. And if you're talking about Bam's going to have to go man up against Joel Embiid in the playoffs if they play, that you can't game plan the entire game to slow him down like you do against Giannis, where you're building a wall of bodies, because where Giannis beats you is attacking downhill, whereas Joel Embiid can beat you any number of ways where you're going to have an individual. And largely the same thing for Kevin Durant. The difference there being PJ Tucker has had individual success defensively against him in the past. Maybe, it's relative, right? Because he's Kevin Durant. He can do this against anybody.
Relative success is KD still ending with 35. Yes.
Still ending with 35. But what does the final score look like? And so, like, if he's getting 35, but Kyrie Irving is off because you're able to switch a really, really good defender onto him, because you're not having to send multiple bodies at Durant. That's a win. If you're able to, and this is where we go back to who the Heat are able to roll out there defensively. Like, if you feel comfortable that a Kyle Lowry, a Victor Oladipo can slow down at least a little bit of Kyrie, then and PJ Tucker is able to guard Kevin Durant, you're not having to throw multiple bodies at these elite players. And last thing that you mentioned earlier, I want to go back to it, which was when you're coming up with these playoff plans to get the ball out of big man's hand down the stretch. Look at what happened against Brooklyn a couple of weeks ago. And this is a game where the Heat had an enormous lead, and Kyrie Irving single-handedly brought Brooklyn back into that game and almost won it. But that last possession, the Heat said, nope, you're not getting the ball. We're not letting this happen. And PJ Tucker and Kyle Lowry attacked Kyrie and made sure that he didn't get the ball for that last, it stops now. Throughout the course of the game against Philadelphia, You can't do that possession after possession after possession with Embiid. Down the stretch, things get different. And so that's where, like, when you're talking about a big man taking over versus having one of these elite wing type players, it's a little bit different.
No, I agree. It's going to, you know what? It was fun already on Monday at FTX Arena. It's going to be fun for the next 3. And if the warden lets me out of here, I'm going to enjoy all 3. Tomorrow's going to be a challenge. Tough back-to-back. Heat is a bit of an older team, are shorthanded. But all things said, it's going to be an enjoyable week. You take stock with plenty of time if there are issues to take care of them as well.
Daniel has a hashtag that I think we got to get trending. Free Ira.
What? I didn't do it, Clay. I didn't do it. I'm innocent.
The Rangers made you so mad. You ended up busting the TV. It was like Ira's like, I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's on Twitter. I might have to retweet it, but there's a Lakers fan who was absolutely going off on the Lakers last night. It's not safe for work, but he's like, Eddie Jones is rolling over in his grave. Vlade Divac is rolling over in his grave. This was what Ira's like right now. It's like Mark Messier is rolling over in his grave. I mean, those guys aren't dead, so like you can't roll over in your grave.
I wouldn't say it about Rod Gilbert out of respect. So I will leave it there for another week. Fun week ahead. I'll be back with Big O on Saturday this week for our accurate Pembroke Pines report. But yeah, interesting times. I really am curious to see how it plays out when we meet again next Wednesday.
Fun stuff, guys. Thanks as always for your comments. Please smash the like button. It does us a huge favor. Big O is going to roll on next. A lot more to get to, both with the Heat, but also the Dolphins, the Marlins. Lots to talk about. Thanks as always, guys. We'll see you again next Wednesday.